The email had been a lifeline, a flickering candle in the suffocating darkness of my unemployment. For 3 months, I'd been adrift in a sea of rejection letters and dwindling savings, the ghost of my former graphic design job haunting my waking hours. The layoff had been brutal, a single, sterile email severing my connection to a life I had meticulously built. Now, my days were a monotonous cycle of scrolling through job boards, the city's humidity a constant, oppressive blanket, mirroring the weight on my shoulders. Then it appeared, an ad so out of place it felt like a glitch in the matrix: data entry operator. Van Fat Corporation, $1,500 per month. I blinked, read it again, and then a third time. $1,500 a month. For data entry. In Ho Chi Minh City, that wasn't just a good salary, it was an absurdity. The average pay for such a role, if you were lucky, was maybe $500. This was triple that. It was the kind of money that could not only pay my rent and bills but also chip away at the mountain of debt I'd accumulated. It was the kind of money that could give me my life back. A cynical part of me, the part that had grown calloused over the last few months, screamed that it was a scam. A phishing attempt, an organ harvesting ring, some elaborate practical joke. But desperation is a powerful filter, capable of blurring the most glaring of red flags into vague, manageable shapes. The corporation's name, Van Fat, meant 10,000 prosperities. It sounded grand, almost comically so. I couldn't find a single shred of information about them online, no website, no social media presence, nothing. The only contact was a cryptic email address. Against my better judgment, fueled by a cocktail of hope and despair, I drafted a quick, professional email, attached my CV, and hit send, feeling a familiar pang of futility. I expected nothing so when a reply landed in my inbox less than 10 minutes later, my heart hammered against my ribs. The message was terse, almost brutally so. Subject: application for data entry operator. Dear Mr. Tran En Qua, Alex, your qualifications are satisfactory. Report for an interview tomorrow evening at 8:30 p.m. Address: Lot 7, Tan Thuan Industrial Zone, District 7. Bring your identification. Demar. Nam hiring manager, Van Fat Corporation. No pleasantries, no request for a preferred time. It was a summons. The location was another oddity. Tan Thuan was one of the older, more desolate industrial zones, a concrete labyrinth of forgotten factories and warehouses that emptied out long before sunset, leaving it to the stray dogs and the ghosts of industry. And an 8:30 p.m. interview? It was bizarre. Yet, the allure of that salary was a siren song, drowning out the warning bells that were now clanging with alarming intensity in the back of my mind. I told myself it was just an unconventional company, maybe a foreign-owned enterprise with different business hours. I had to believe that. I needed this. The next evening, I found myself on my sputtering motorbike, navigating the labyrinthine, poorly lit streets of District 7. The vibrant chaos of central Saigon faded behind me, replaced by the stark, monolithic shapes of warehouses and factories. The air grew still and heavy with the metallic tang of rust and the faint, sweet smell of decay. Streetlights became sparse, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters at the edge of my vision. There was no one else on the road. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of my engine and the crunch of loose gravel under my tires. It felt like I was riding to the edge of the world, and then I saw it. Van Fat Corporation. The building was a monument to brutalist architecture, a 15-story concrete behemoth that clawed at the bruised twilight sky. It was the only building for at least a kilometer in any direction, alone, gray tooth in a jaw of urban decay. Most of its windows were dark, but a few on the upper floors flickered with a sickly, intermittent neon glow that painted the surrounding desolation in hues of green and pink. The sign above the entrance, VN Fight Corporation, was in the same flickering neon, some letters dark, so it read VNP at CRO Asian. A fittingly broken name for a building in the heart of nowhere. That I parked my motorbike next to a row of identical, black Honda Waves, the only sign of life. A shiver, unrelated to the evening's slight chill, traced a cold finger down my spine. The air here was different. Colder. It was a deep, cellar-like cold that seemed to emanate from the building itself, a stark contrast to the balmy Saigon summer. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and pushed open the heavy glass door. The lobby was vast, empty, and silent. The silence here was different from the silence outside. It was a pressurized, waiting silence, the kind that makes the blood hum in your ears. The floor was polished black marble that reflected the flickering overhead lights, creating a disorienting, watery effect. A single, long reception desk, also carved from black marble, stretched across one wall, unmanned. Behind it, a large, ornate grandfather clock stood silent, its hands frozen at what looked like 3:33. The only sound was a faint, almost subliminal hum that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of my shoes, a low, guttural thrum from the building's unseen guts. "Mr. Tran." The voice, dry as autumn leaves, made me jump. A man had emerged from a darkened corridor to my right, moving with a silence that was utterly unnerving. He was tall and painfully gaunt, his suit hanging off his skeletal frame as if on a wire hanger. His face was a pale, narrow wedge in the dim light, dominated by eyes so dark and sunken they looked like thumbprints bruised into his skin. His hair was thin and slicked back, emphasizing a high, waxy forehead. He looked less like a hiring manager and more like an undertaker who had forgotten to eat. "I am Mr. Nam," he said, his voice a low rasp. He didn't offer a hand, just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head. "You are punctual. Good. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Nam," I managed, my own voice sounding too loud in the cavernous space. "This way." He turned and glided back down the corridor from which he'd appeared. I followed, my footsteps echoing unnervingly on the marble. The humming grew louder as we moved deeper into the building, a resonant frequency that made my teeth ache. He led me into a small, windowless office containing a simple metal desk and 2 chairs. The air was frigid, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. He gestured for me to sit. The interview was the strangest I'd ever had. He didn't ask about my work experience, my skills, or my career goals. He didn't even seem to glance at the CV I offered him. Instead, he just stared at me with those hollow, unblinking eyes, as if he were measuring my weight, my density, my very soul. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "You are desperate, Mr. Tran," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. His voice was devoid of any emotion, a flat, dead thing that I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "I'm very eager for an opportunity, yes. The salary is substantial," he continued, his gaze unwavering. $1,500 a month, deposited on the 1st of every month. The work is simple. Data entry. Your shift is from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., Monday to Friday. You will be the only one on your floor. You will be the only one in the building, for the most part. The only one. The words hung in the frigid air. An entire 15-story building, and I would be alone. The idea was both liberating and terrifying. No office politics, no over-the-shoulder supervision. But the isolation, the profound, absolute isolation, why only at night? I asked, my curiosity momentarily overriding my unease. Nam's expression didn't change, but a flicker, something ancient and knowing, passed through his dark eyes. Our clients operate in different time zones. The data is sensitive. The work requires a quiet environment. It was a non-answer, a corporate platitude that explained nothing. But I was in no position to press the issue. I needed this job. I needed that money. I could get used to the quiet, I see, I said, nodding as if his explanation made perfect sense. That he reached into a drawer in his desk and pulled out two things, a standard employment contract and a single, laminated sheet of A4 paper. He pushed them across the desk towards me. "The contract is standard," he rasped. "Health insurance, 2 weeks paid leave. The usual." Then he tapped a long, bony finger on the laminated sheet. "This, however, is not standard. This is the most important document you will ever read. These are the rules of Van Fat Corporation. You will memorize them. You will adhere to them without question or deviation. Your employment, and indeed your well-being, depend on it." I picked up the sheet. The text was printed in a stark, blocky font. At the top, it read, "VN Fight Corporation, Night Shift Protocol, Mandatory." Then, there was a numbered list. I started to read, a small, incredulous smile touching my lips. 1. The main entrance must be locked precisely at 9 p.m. After this time, you may hear knocking. Check the peephole. If you see a coworker you recognize, you may let them in. If you see no one, do not, under any circumstances, open the door. It is not a coworker. Point 2. Your desk lamp is your most important tool. It must remain on for the entire duration of your shift. Should it extinguish of its own accord, do not move. Do not breathe. Sit perfectly still in the darkness for a full 10 minutes. Then, and only then, may you attempt to turn it back on. Point 3. The large format printer on the 5th floor will activate on its own every night at precisely midnight. It will print a single page. If this page is blank, you may ignore it. If the page is printed with the words, "Get out," in red ink, you must immediately vacate the 5th floor. Do not take the elevator. Use the stairs. Do not look back. Point 4. From time to time, you may hear a voice call your name. It may sound like a family member, a friend, or a lover. It is not them. Ignore the voice. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge it. Continue with your work as if you have heard nothing. Point 5. The main elevator is programmed to never stop at the 7th floor. If, for any reason, the doors open onto the 7th floor and you see a hallway bathed in red light, do not exit the elevator. Do not look into the hallway for more than a second. Press the "door close" button repeatedly until the doors shut. Pray they do. Point 6. Avoid looking into the mirror in the 3rd floor break room after 1 a.m. If you must use the restroom, use the one on your assigned floor. If you do find yourself before the mirror and your reflection blinks before you do, turn around, walk out of the room, lock the door behind you, and never enter it again. Point 7. It is normal to hear the sound of footsteps behind you as you walk the halls. Do not be alarmed. Do not turn around. Do not ask, "Who's there?" It will answer you. Point 8. The grandfather clock in the main lobby is broken. Its hands are stopped at 3:33 a.m. Do not stare at it when you pass. It is said that if you stare for too long, you will see something staring back from the reflection on the glass. Point 9. A man named Mr. Gray may approach your desk and offer you a cup of coffee. He may seem friendly and unassuming. Politely decline his offer, do not make eye contact, and walk away. Return to your desk only when you are sure he has gone. There is no employee named Mr. Gray. Point 10. Your computer terminal is for data entry only. You may, at some point, see a file on your desktop titled with your own name, followed by _log. For you, it will be Alex_log. Do not open this file. We cannot stress this enough. It knows more about you than you do. Point 11. Your shift ends at 5 a.m. Before you leave the building, you are required to check the live feed from the security camera pointed at your desk. The monitor is by the main exit. If, on the screen, you see yourself still sitting at your desk, do not go back. Do not call out. Run. Flee the building and do not return. Ever that I finished reading and looked up at Mr. Nam, a disbelieving laugh escaping my lips. Is this some kind of joke? A hazing ritual for the new guy? Mr. Nam did not laugh. His face was a mask of grim seriousness. We do not joke at Van Fat Corporation, Mr. Tran. This is not a prank. This is your job. These are the rules. Sign the contract, and you agree to follow them. Break them. He paused, leaning forward slightly, his dark eyes seeming to swallow the light in the room, and you are done for. We will not be held liable for any incidents arising from your negligence. The cold in the room seemed to intensify, seeping into my bones. The absurdity of the situation was staggering. It had to be a test. A psychological evaluation to see if I was gullible, or if I would question authority. They wanted to see if I'd just blindly follow a set of nonsensical, terrifying rules. The problem was, I didn't have the luxury of failing their test. I needed this job. The $1,500 was a tangible, life-altering sum. The rules were just words on a page. I could play their strange game. I could pretend to follow their silly rules until the first paycheck cleared. I understand, I said, my voice firm, projecting a confidence I did not feel. I'll follow them to the letter. He seemed satisfied. He pushed a pen across the desk. Sign here, and here. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the contract, my signature a spidery, uncertain scrawl. I felt a sense of finality, a door swinging shut behind me. I had just sold my nights to a ghost building and a madman for a pile of cash. I just hoped I wouldn't regret it. Good, Mr. Nam said, collecting the papers. Your assigned workstation is on the 9th floor. Desk 901. The elevator is at the end of the main hall. Your access card is on the desk. It will grant you access to your floor, the break room on the 3rd, and the archives on the 5th. Your shift starts now. It is 8:55 p.m. He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. One last thing, Mr. Tran. Yes. Welcome to Van Fat Corporation. We hope you have a productive tenure. The corners of his mouth twitched, a horrifyingly brief and mirthless gesture that might have been a smile that he led me out of the office and gestured towards the dark maw of the main hallway. The elevator is that way. I will see myself out. And with that, he turned and walked back the way we came, his form dissolving into the oppressive darkness with that same unnatural silence. I was alone. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I walked down the hall, my own footsteps echoing like gunshots in the profound silence. The air was thick with the low, resonant hum of the building, a constant, unseen presence. I found the elevator, a set of imposing brass doors that looked far too ornate for this concrete tomb. I swiped the access card Mr. Nam had left me. A small green light blinked, and with a soft chime, the doors slid open. The interior of the elevator was surprisingly modern, all stainless steel and recessed lighting. I stepped inside, the doors closing with a heavy, final-sounding thud. The panel was simple. I pressed the button for the 9th floor. The elevator began its ascent, not with a lurch, but with a smooth, silent, almost imperceptible motion. It was like being in a rising coffin. The doors chimed and opened onto the 9th floor. The layout was a vast, open-plan office space, a sea of identical, empty cubicles stretching out into the gloom. The only light came from a single desk lamp in the distance, casting a lonely pool of warm, yellow light in the overwhelming ocean of gray and black. That had to be my desk. Desk 901. As I stepped out of the elevator, a wave of that unnatural, bone-deep cold washed over me. It was a solid, physical presence, far colder than the lobby or Mr. Nam's office. I shivered, pulling my thin jacket tighter around me. It was the middle of summer in Saigon, a city famous for its sweltering heat, yet here, it felt like a morgue. The air carried a faint, antiseptic smell, like old cleaning products and something else, something vaguely organic and unpleasant that I couldn't quite place. That I walked through the maze of empty cubicles, the silence so profound that I could hear the soft rustle of my own clothes. The hum was still there, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to be coming from the vents in the ceiling. Occasionally, a faint, whisper-like sound would drift from the dark corners of the room, the sigh of the building's ancient ventilation system. At least, that's what I told myself it was. Finally, I reached my workstation. It was just like the others, a simple gray cubicle with a desktop computer, a keyboard, a mouse, and the aforementioned lamp, which was already on, casting its comforting glow. A single, crisp sheet of paper sat next to the keyboard. It was a list of logins and passwords, and a brief, one-sentence instruction: transcribe the data from the scanned invoices in the source folder into the central database. Ensure 100% accuracy. Simple enough that I sat down in the worn office chair, which let out a mournful squeak of protest. The computer monitor flickered to life as I moved the mouse, displaying a simple, no-frills desktop. A single folder labeled Source was on the left, and a program icon labeled VPC Database was on the right. I looked at the clock in the corner of the screen. 8:59 p.m. My gaze drifted towards the main entrance to the floor, the elevator bay. I thought of the first rule. The main entrance must be locked precisely at 9 p.m. Did that apply to the floor entrance too, or just the main building door? Mr. Nam hadn't specified. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Was I supposed to go all the way back down to the lobby? No, he'd said he was seeing himself out. That must have meant he'd lock it. But the rules said you must lock it. The clock on the screen ticked over to 9 p.m. I held my breath. Nothing happened. The silence remained unbroken. The hum remained constant. I let out a slow, shaky breath. Maybe it was just for the main ground floor door. I was probably safe up here on the 9th floor. I was just letting the creepy atmosphere and those ridiculous rules get to me. I was a grown man, a professional. I was here to do a job. That I opened the source folder. It was filled with thousands of scanned files, each a blurry, handwritten invoice from decades past. The work was as mind-numbing as advertised. I opened the database program, logged in, and began to type. The rhythmic clacking of my keyboard was a small, comforting sound against the oppressive silence. I fell into a rhythm, the sheer monotony of the task a welcome distraction. Transcribe, save, next file. Transcribe, save, next file. The numbers and words blurred into a meaningless stream of data. An hour passed. Then another. I was starting to feel a strange sense of peace in the isolation. No distractions, no one bothering me. Just me and the work. The salary felt a little less like a deal with the devil and a little more like a strange but manageable eccentricity. I was handling it, and then I heard it knock. 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 The sound was sharp, clear, and terrifyingly close. It came from the direction of the elevator bay, from the main door to the floor. My fingers froze above the keyboard. My blood ran cold. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mr. Nam had said I would be alone. That I sat there, paralyzed, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. Knock. 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 Rule number 1 swam up from the depths of my memory, its words now seeming less like a joke and more like a dire warning. Check the peephole. If you see no one, do not, under any circumstances, open the door. But that was for the main door, wasn't it? There wasn't even a peephole on the floor door. That I tried to rationalize it. A security guard doing their rounds, maybe. A late coworker who Mr. Nam had forgotten to mention. But the knocking had a strange quality to it, a hollow, dead sound, like wood rapping against wood. Even though I knew the doors were metal and glass, slowly, cautiously, I pushed my chair back, the squeak echoing like a scream in the silence. I stood up, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. I peered over the top of my cubicle, across the sea of darkness towards the entrance. I could see nothing but the faint reflection of my own desk lamp on the polished floor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a pathetic, trembling thing. "Is anyone there?" Silence. The humming of the vents was the only reply. Maybe I had imagined it. An old building making old building noises. The wind. Anything but what my gut was screaming it was that I was about to sit back down, to dismiss it as a figment of my overactive imagination, when the knocking came a third time. It was frenzied now, a frantic, desperate pounding that vibrated through the floor. Knock, 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 and then, a voice. A whisper, really. So faint it was almost lost beneath the humming of the vents, but it was undeniably there. It slithered through the air, a cold, sibilant sound that seemed to come from right beside my ear. "Alex," I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. It was my name. Not my Vietnamese name, Qua, but the name I used with friends, the name on my CV. The voice was thin and reedy, like the rustling of dry leaves, but it held a chilling, impossible familiarity. It sounded a little like my mother, if she were whispering from the bottom of a well. Rule number 4. From time to time, you may hear a voice call your name. It may sound like a family member. It is not them. Ignore the voice that my breath hitched in my throat. This couldn't be real. I was cracking. The stress, the isolation, the creepy building, it was all getting to me. I was hallucinating. That had to be it. That I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against them, trying to force the world back into a shape that made sense. It's not real, it's not real, it's not real. I chanted the words in my head like a mantra. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my body rigid with fear, waiting for the knocking to start again, for the voice to whisper my name once more, but there was nothing. Only the silence, which now felt heavier, more menacing than before. It was a silence that was aware of me. Slowly, I lowered my hands. I took a deep, shuddering breath and forced myself to walk back to my desk. My legs were trembling so violently I could barely stand. I collapsed into my chair, the squeak making me flinch. My eyes darted around the cavernous, dark office, half expecting to see a figure standing in the shadows between the cubicles. But there was nothing. Just empty desks and the oppressive, watching gloom that I stared at the computer screen, the half-finished invoice a meaningless jumble of characters. My hands were shaking too much to type. I looked at my desk lamp, its warm, yellow glow the only thing holding the suffocating darkness at bay. It was my anchor, my tiny island of sanity in this sea of creeping dread. Rule number 2. Your desk lamp is your most important tool. It must remain on, as if on cue. The lamp flickered, once. Twice. The light stuttered, turning the office into a strobing nightmare of sharp shadows and blinding flashes. My heart seized in my chest. No, 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 please no, and then, with a soft, final-sounding pop, the bulb went out that I was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only light was the faint, cold glow of the computer monitor, which seemed miles away. The hum of the vents sounded louder now, more predatory. The silence was a physical weight pressing in on me from all sides. Rule number 2, the second half. Should it extinguish of its own accord, do not move. Do not breathe. Sit perfectly still in the darkness for a full 10 minutes. My body was screaming at me to run, to get up, to find a light switch, to get the hell out of there. But Mr. Nam's gaunt, serious face flashed in my mind. Break the rules, and you are done for. Was this part of the test? To see if I would panic, I forced myself to obey. I froze in my chair, my body rigid as stone. I held my breath, the air burning in my lungs. My eyes were wide open, straining to see something, anything, in the inky blackness. Every tiny creak of the building, every faint sigh of the ventilation system, was magnified into a monstrous threat. I could feel the presence of the darkness, a living, breathing entity that was slowly, deliberately closing in around me. My lungs were on fire. I had to breathe. I let the air out in a slow, silent stream, then drew in another shallow, careful breath, praying it was quiet enough. The sound of my own blood pounding in my ears was a deafening drum. Minutes stretched into eternities. The 10-minute rule felt like a life sentence. My mind started to play tricks on me. I saw shapes moving in the peripheral gloom, fleeting shadows that vanished when I tried to focus on them. I felt a cold draft on the back of my neck, as if someone had just leaned in close behind me. Rule number 7. It is normal to hear the sound of footsteps behind you as you walk the halls. Do not turn around. I wasn't walking, but the feeling was the same. A presence, right behind me. I fought the overwhelming urge to spin around in my chair. My phone. It was in my pocket. I could use the flashlight. But the rules said not to move. Did that include reaching into my pocket? The ambiguity was torture. Was this a test of obedience or a trap? I decided to wait. I counted the seconds in my head, a slow, agonizing crawl. 1, 2, 3. The fear was a physical thing, a cold, heavy lump in my gut. What would happen if I moved? What was in the darkness with me? What was waiting for me to break the rules? The 10 minutes felt like 10 years. When I finally estimated that the time was up, I did so with a silent, desperate prayer. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers fumbling in the dark for the lamp's switch. My hand brushed against something cold and smooth that wasn't the lamp. I recoiled with a suppressed yelp. It felt like glass. I remembered the grandfather clock in the lobby. Rule number 8. Don't stare at it, something stares back. Was there another clock here, in the dark? No. Focus. The lamp. I reached out again, more carefully this time, my fingers tracing the base of the lamp until they found the small, familiar switch. I clicked it up, nothing. Then my heart sank. I clicked it again. And again. The bulb was dead. I was trapped in the dark. Then I remembered the second part of the rule. Then, and only then, may you attempt to turn it back on. I had attempted it. What now? The rules didn't cover this. A dead bulb. A simple, mundane equipment failure that now felt like a death sentence. A new sound reached my ears, cutting through the hum of the vents. It was a low, rhythmic whirring sound, coming from a distance. It sounded like a machine starting up. I checked the time on my monitor. 11:58 p.m., the sound was coming from below. I listened intently, trying to place it. It sounded like an old dot matrix printer, the kind that makes a high-pitched, mechanical screech as it works. Rule number 3. The large format printer on the 5th floor will activate on its own every night at precisely midnight. In 2 minutes. My blood turned to ice. I had to get out of this darkness. I needed a light. But the rules, I thought about my access card. It granted me access to the 5th floor. The archives. I could create a pretext. I needed a file from the archives to continue my work. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was better than sitting here, a helpless victim in the suffocating dark. The 5th floor would have lights, wouldn't it? The entire building couldn't be this dark. My terror of the darkness on my floor warred with my terror of the unknown on the 5th. But the printer rule had a condition. It was only dangerous if the page was printed in red. If it was blank, I could ignore it. What were the chances? It was probably just another one of their stupid, psychological games. A 50-50 chance. I'd take it. Anything was better than this. That I stood up, my chair squeaking in protest. I used the faint glow of my monitor to navigate my way out of the cubicle, my hands outstretched in front of me like a blind man. I moved as quickly as I dared, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every shadow seemed to writhe and reach for me. I found the elevator bay, a slightly less dark rectangle in the overwhelming blackness. I fumbled for the down button, pressing it with a sweaty thumb. A moment later, a soft chime announced the elevator's arrival, its interior light a glorious, beautiful thing. I practically dove inside, pressing the button for the 5th floor with a shaking finger. The doors slid shut, encasing me once more in the silent, rising coffin. As the elevator descended, I could hear the printer more clearly now, its rhythmic, high-pitched whirring a mechanical heartbeat in the silent building. The doors chimed again and opened onto the 5th floor. This floor was different. It was a single, vast room filled with towering metal shelves, a library of forgotten paper. The air here was thick with the smell of dust and decaying paper. And, unlike my floor, the main lights were on, casting a harsh, sterile, fluorescent glare over everything. The relief was so intense it almost brought me to my knees. That I, in the center of the room, on a large metal table, sat the source of the noise. It was an ancient, yellowed large-format printer, a relic from the 90s. It was shuddering and whirring, slowly, painstakingly, feeding a large sheet of paper through its rollers. The clock on a nearby wall read 12 a.m. Precisely that I stood by the elevator, my hand hovering over the door close button, my escape route planned. I watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the printer head moved back and forth, with that grating, mechanical screech. It wasn't printing in black. The ink cartridge moving was a deep, vibrant crimson. My throat went dry. My carefully constructed logic, my rationalizations, they all crumbled to dust. This was real. It was all real. The printer stopped. The whirring died, plunging the floor back into an eerie silence, broken only by the ever-present hum of the building. The single sheet of paper, pristine white except for the 2 words printed in the center, slid out of the machine and settled onto the output tray. From where I stood, I could read them clearly. The letters were stark, blocky, and seemed to almost drip down the page. They were written in a shade of red that was unnervingly close to the color of fresh blood. Get outf. For a second, I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot. The 2 words seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a direct, personal command. This wasn't a prank. This was a warning. A threat. Rule number 3. If the page is printed with the words, "Get out," in red ink, you must immediately vacate the 5th floor. Do not take the elevator. Use the stairs. Do not look back. My mind screamed at me to obey. I tore my gaze away from the horrifying message and frantically looked for the stairs. A small, illuminated red sign pointed to a fire escape door at the far end of the room. I bolted. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the vast, silent space. I didn't dare look back at the printer, at the message that was meant for me. I didn't dare to think about what might happen if I disobeyed. I slammed through the fire escape door and found myself in a narrow, concrete stairwell, lit by a single, bare bulb. The air was thick and stagnant. I didn't care. I pounded down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The only thought in my mind was to get away from the 5th floor, to get back to the relative safety of my own dark corner of this nightmare. I burst out onto the 9th floor landing, my heart feeling like it was about to explode out of my chest. I scrambled back into the pitch-black office, the darkness I had fled now feeling like a sanctuary compared to the stark, horrifying truth I had witnessed below. I stumbled back to my cubicle and collapsed into my chair, shaking uncontrollably that I stared into the oppressive darkness, my mind reeling. The rules were not a joke. They were not a test. They were a survival guide for a place that operated on a set of laws that defied reason and sanity. I was trapped here until 5 a.m., in the dark, with the knowledge that there were things in this building, real, malevolent things, that were not just a product of my imagination. The knocking, the whisper, the printer, they were all real, and I had 9 more rules to worry about. The high salary, the reason I had walked into this nightmare, now felt like a pittance. No amount of money was worth this. But the contract was signed. The door was locked. And the night was far from over. I looked at the list of rules I had printed out and placed on my desk earlier, now barely visible in the faint glow of the monitor. They seemed to stare back at me, each one a potential death sentence. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how was I going to survive until sunrise? The sun had never felt so good. When the clock on my monitor finally ticked over to 5 a.m., I didn't even bother to pack my things. I followed the final rule, my body moving with the jerky, unnatural precision of a puppet. I walked to the main lobby, the oppressive silence of the building feeling like it was trying to hold me back. My eyes were fixed on the security monitor by the exit. On the small, grainy screen, I saw my desk on the 9th floor. The chair was empty. A wave of relief so powerful it left me dizzy washed over me. I wasn't on the screen. I could leave. I practically threw myself at the main door, my fumbling hand struggling with the lock, and then I was out. The humid, pre-dawn air of Saigon hit me like a physical blow, a stark contrast to the refrigerated tomb I had just left. I stood on the concrete steps, gasping for breath, the first rays of sunlight painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. The world was still here. It was real. The birds were starting to sing. The distant hum of early morning traffic was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The ride home was a blur. I walked into my apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it, my body trembling with exhaustion and residual fear. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blood-red words, "Get out," burning in my vision. I heard the phantom knocking, the insidious whisper of my name. I felt the suffocating weight of the absolute darkness that I spent the day in a state of agitated paralysis. I called my mom, just to hear her real voice, a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. I told her I'd found a job, a good one, and that I was fine. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Every rational part of my brain, every instinct for self-preservation, screamed at me not to go back. I should take the access card, the contract, and the list of insane rules to the police. But what would I tell them? That a printer gave me a scary note? That I heard noises in an old building? They would think I was crazy, or on drugs. There was no proof, nothing tangible beyond my own terror, and then there was the money, $1,500. It was already promised, a figure that hovered in my mind like a holy number. It was the key to unlocking my life from the prison of debt and desperation. Quitting meant returning to that suffocating darkness of unemployment, a different kind of horror, but one that was all too real and immediate. The fear of Van Fat was a sharp, stabbing pain, but the fear of poverty was a chronic, grinding ache. I had to choose my poison. By the time evening fell, painting the city in long shadows, I had made my decision. A terrible, foolish, and perhaps fatal decision. I would go back. I would be smarter this time. I would be more careful. I would follow the rules to the absolute letter. I would treat it like a video game, a deadly serious one, where every move was critical. I would collect my paycheck and then I would disappear. I could do this. I had to. That night, pulling up to the monolithic gray building, the flickering neon sign that read VNP at CRO Asian seemed to mock me. My bravado from the afternoon had evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar dread that settled deep in my gut. The air was just as cold, the silence just as profound. Walking into the lobby felt like willingly stepping into my own tomb. The grandfather clock's hands were still frozen at 3:33, a silent, ominous promise of a future terror that I took the silent elevator to the 9th floor, the ride feeling even longer than the night before. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the same vast, dark ocean of cubicles. But this time, my desk lamp wasn't on. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this a new change? A new test? I had to walk through the entire, suffocating darkness to get to my desk that I used my phone's flashlight, a tiny, pathetic beam against the overwhelming gloom. As I walked, my light swept across the empty desks and chairs, and I started noticing things I'd missed in my panicked state the night before. There was a thin layer of dust on everything, as if the office hadn't been truly used in years. The computer monitors were old, bulky CRT models, not the flat screens you'd expect in a modern company. And the air, the smell was stronger tonight. That strange, organic scent from before was more pronounced, a cloying mix of damp, freshly turned earth and something metallic and vaguely coppery, like old blood. Shadows danced at the edge of my flashlight beam, long, distorted shapes that seemed to writhe and recoil from the light. I knew it was just a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were moving on their own, that I was walking through a crowd of unseen things that were just beyond my perception. The hum from the vents was still there, but tonight it was punctuated by other sounds. Faint, wet-sounding clicks from the dark corners of the room. A soft, dragging sound from the floor above. It was as if the building itself were alive, and slowly waking up. When I finally reached my desk, I saw a new, genuine fluorescent bulb sitting next to the broken lamp. A small, almost considerate gesture that was profoundly unsettling. It meant someone, or something, had been here. They knew the bulb had blown. They had replaced it. They were watching. I quickly screwed in the new bulb, and when I flipped the switch, the familiar, warm yellow light flooded my cubicle. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The light didn't make me feel safe, not anymore, but it made the terror manageable that I sat down and tried to focus on the mind-numbing data entry. I worked with a frantic, desperate energy, hoping the monotony would drown out the fear. But my mind kept wandering. Why this charade? A night shift for data entry made no sense. There were no urgent deadlines flashing on my screen, no emails from international clients demanding immediate results. The invoices I was transcribing were decades old, some dating back to the 1970s. What possible urgency could there be in digitizing ancient, crumbling paper for a company that didn't seem to exist outside of this building? Who were they? What did Van Fat Corporation actually do? My job felt like a cover for something else, a single, brightly lit stage in the center of an enormous, dark, and terrifying theater. I was the lone actor, performing for an unseen audience, and I didn't even know what the play was about. The first few hours of my shift passed in a state of hypervigilant tension. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the lights, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept my eyes glued to my screen, my hands flying across the keyboard, trying to lose myself in the work. Around 11 p.m., the lights on the ceiling began to flicker. It wasn't the random, stuttering flicker from the night before. This was rhythmic. A pattern. Flicker, flicker, pause, flicker, flicker, pause. It was like a code, a signal being sent across the vast, dark office. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just faulty wiring in an old building. But the pattern was too regular, too deliberate. It felt like a language I couldn't understand, a conversation happening just above my head. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, so thick I could almost taste it. It was as if someone had just dug up a fresh grave right in the middle of the office. I had to cover my nose with the collar of my shirt to block it out. Then came the footsteps. Rule number 7. It is normal to hear the sound of footsteps behind you as you walk the halls. I wasn't in the hall, I was in my cubicle. But I heard them. Faint, at first, a soft, shuffling sound in the distance. They grew closer, the sound of bare feet on a dusty floor. They walked the perimeter of the open-plan office, a slow, deliberate patrol. I could track their progress by the sound, moving from one end of the room to the other. My back was to the main aisle. The footsteps came up right behind my cubicle and then stopped and I froze, every muscle tensed. I could feel a presence there, just on the other side of the thin cubicle wall. I could feel their attention on me, a palpable weight on the back of my neck. The rule was clear: do not turn around. Do not ask, who's there? My heart was a wild bird trapped in my ribcage. I stared at my monitor, my eyes unseeing, my fingers poised over the keyboard. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The silence stretched for an agonizing minute, and then the shuffling footsteps started again, moving away, continuing their slow, patient patrol of the office that I was learning. I was adapting. I was surviving. But the night was a minefield, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I stepped on a mine. That and my first mistake came just after midnight. The printer on the 5th floor started its nightly ritual, its high-pitched screech a familiar harbinger of dread. I stayed put this time, my hands clenched into fists, praying that tonight the page would be blank. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing happened. No disembodied voices, no frantic knocking. I allowed myself a sliver of hope. Maybe I was in the clear. That it was my desk lamp that betrayed me. Without warning, it flickered violently, just as it had the night before. And then, with that same, sickeningly soft pop, it went out. Darkness. Absolute and complete, the rule screamed in my head. Do not move. Do not breathe. Sit perfectly still for 10 minutes. But the memory of the previous night, of that suffocating, waiting darkness, was too fresh. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I couldn't do it. I couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever was in the dark with me. That and my hand shot out, against my will, a desperate, instinctual reaction. I fumbled for the switch on the lamp, my fingers clumsy with fear. Click. Click. Nothing. I had moved. I had broken the rule. For a moment, there was only silence. The same oppressive, waiting silence. Maybe I was okay. Maybe the rule was conditional. Maybe nothing would happen. Then I heard it started in the distance, from the far side of the office. Footsteps. But not the slow, shuffling footsteps from before. These were heavy, purposeful, and fast. Thump. 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 They were running. Running towards my desk. Terror of a kind I had never known seized me. This was it. This was the consequence. Whatever patrolled the halls, I had just alerted it to my presence. I had broken the rules, and it was coming for me. The thumping grew louder, closer, echoing in the cavernous space. Thump. 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 It was the sound of something heavy, something powerful, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I was paralyzed in my chair, a cornered animal waiting for the predator to strike. I could feel the vibrations through the floor now. It was almost here that I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for impact, for pain, for whatever horrifying end awaited me. The footsteps thundered right up behind my cubicle, and then stopped. The silence that followed was 1,000 times worse than the noise. I was afraid to breathe. I could feel it there, right behind me, just on the other side of the thin wall. I could almost smell it, that scent of damp earth and old blood, overwhelming and suffocating. It was waiting. Was it waiting for me to turn around? Was that the final part of the trap? I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in abject terror. It felt like hours. My mind was a screaming void. Eventually, the sheer, primal need to know, to see my killer, began to overwhelm the fear. But the rule, do not turn around, was my only shield. Suddenly, a voice shattered the silence. Alex. My head snapped up. The voice, it was my mother's voice. Perfect. Flawless. It was her voice when she was worried, that slight tremor, that rising inflection. It came from the direction of my computer speakers. Alex, baby, what's wrong? Why are you in the dark? Talk to me. Rule number 4. It may sound like a family member. It is not them, but it was so real. My heart ached with a sudden, desperate longing for her, for the safety and comfort she represented. In that moment of pure terror, hearing her voice was like a lifeline. My resolve, already shattered by the footsteps, crumbled completely. Mom. I whispered, my voice cracking. Mom, I'm scared. I had answered. I had broken another rule. The response was immediate and horrifying. My mother's voice vanished, replaced by a sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. It was a laugh. A deep, guttural, inhuman laugh that erupted from the speakers, a sound full of ancient malice and derision. It was the sound of a predator that had just watched its prey willingly walk into a trap. At the same time, my computer monitor, which had been my only source of faint light, flickered violently. The screen dissolved into a shrieking cascade of black and white static, the sound a piercing shriek in the silent room. The guttural laughter and the electronic screeching filled my cubicle, an unholy symphony of terror. I screamed. A raw, ragged sound torn from my throat. I scrambled back in my chair, tipping it over, and crashed to the floor. I crawled backwards, away from the desk, away from the horrifying sounds, until my back hit the cold metal wall of the next cubicle. I curled into a ball, my hands over my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it was inside my head, echoing in my skull. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The laughter died. The static vanished. The monitor returned to its normal display. The desk lamp, which had been dead for agonizing minutes, flickered back on, casting its warm, yellow glow over the scene of my breakdown, and the footsteps were gone. The presence behind my cubicle had vanished. The air, while still cold, no longer felt so heavy with menace. It was a test. A punishment. I had broken the rules, and it had shown me what it could do. It had toyed with me, used my fear and my love for my mother against me, and then it had simply stopped. I lay on the floor for a long time, shaking and sobbing, a pathetic, broken mess. The allure of the $1,500 salary felt like a distant, insane dream. This place was feeding on my fear. It was a sentient, malevolent entity, and I was its new toy. Eventually, the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying clarity. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep walking this tightrope. But the thought of leaving, of breaking the contract, was still tied to the crushing reality of my life outside these walls. I felt trapped, not just in the building, but in my own life. I shakily got to my feet, righted my chair, and sat back down at my desk. I stared at the screen, at the harmless-looking invoice data. The contrast between the mundane nature of my task and the soul-crushing horror of my environment was a form of madness in itself. My eyes fell upon the list of rules. I had broken 2 of them. What about the others? A strange, morbid curiosity began to bloom in the wasteland of my fear. If I was going to be trapped here, if I was going to be subjected to this torment, then I wanted to understand it. I wanted to know the boundaries of this nightmare. It was a foolish, reckless thought, born of desperation and a mind pushed to the brink. I looked at the clock. 1:28 a.m., rule number 6. Avoid looking into the mirror in the 3rd floor break room after 1 a.m. If you do, And your reflection blinks before you do, turn around, walk out of the room, lock the door behind you, and never enter it again. Then my access card could get me to the third floor. The rule wasn't a strict prohibition. It was a warning with a contingency plan. If it blinks, then lock the door. The scientist in me, the part that craved logic and understanding, wanted to test the hypothesis. The terrified man in me screamed that it was suicide, the morbid curiosity won. I needed to know. I needed to see for myself. That I stood up, my legs feeling steadier now, my resolve hardened by a fatalistic numbness. I walked to the elevator, the building's ever-present hum seeming to watch me with amusement. I rode the silent coffin down to the third floor. The doors opened onto a hallway that was different from the others. It was carpeted, the walls a sickly shade of institutional beige. A sign on the wall with an arrow pointed the way, break room/restrooms. I followed it. The break room was small and sad. A few cheap plastic tables and chairs, a microwave that looked like it had survived a war, and a grimy coffee machine. A single, flickering fluorescent light overhead cast everything in a buzzing, intermittent glare. The smell of stale coffee and something else, something sour and unpleasant, hung in the air, and on the far wall, over a small sink, was the mirror. It was a large, simple, plate glass mirror, its surface slightly warped and cloudy with age. It reflected the sad little room, the flickering light creating a strobing, disorienting effect. I walked towards it, my heart beginning to pound again. My reflection approached me, a pale, wide-eyed stranger with my face. That I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. I could see the dark circles under my eyes, the fear etched into the lines around my mouth. I took a deep breath. Okay. Just a mirror. I stared into my own eyes, forcing myself not to blink. The flickering light made it difficult. The reflected room seemed to jump and jitter. For a long moment, nothing happened. My reflection mimicked my every subtle movement, my every breath. I started to feel foolish. Of course it wasn't going to do anything. It was a mirror. This was all just in my head, a psychological game that I was about to turn away, to dismiss it as another bout of paranoia. When it happened, then my reflection blinked. That it was a quick, subtle movement, a flutter of its eyelids. But I hadn't blinked. My own eyes were wide, dry, and starting to burn from the strain. I stared, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. It had to be a trick of the light, the flickering fluorescent. It blinked again. Deliberately. A slow, lazy blink, entirely independent of my own actions. And then, the reflection's mouth, my mouth, twisted into a smile. It wasn't my smile. It was a wide, predatory, knowing grin that stretched my face into a horrifying mask. It was the smile of something that was not me, looking out at me from behind my own eyes. The contingency plan from the rule flashed in my mind, a beacon in a storm of pure terror. Turn around, walk out of the room, lock the door behind you, and never enter it again. That I didn't need to be told twice. I spun around, a strangled cry escaping my lips, and bolted for the door. As my hand closed around the doorknob, I heard a sound from behind me. A loud, sharp bang, as if something had just slammed its fist against the mirror from the other side. That I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway. The break room door had an old-fashioned lock on the outside, a simple deadbolt. My hands shaking so violently I could barely function, I slammed the door shut and fumbled with the lock. As I slid the bolt home, a tremendous crash erupted from within the room, the sound of shattering glass. It was followed by a heavy, wet thud, as if something large and heavy had just fallen onto the floor, and then, a furious, frantic banging started on the other side of the door. Bang! 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 It wasn't the sound of a fist. It was heavier, harder. Something was trying to break the door down. A low, guttural growl, filled with rage and frustration, seeped through the wood. That I didn't wait to see if the lock would hold. I ran. I fled down the hallway, the sound of the monstrous banging echoing behind me, and jabbed the elevator button with a frantic, desperate energy. The silent ride back up to the 9th floor was the most terrifying of my life. I was trapped in a box, a potential victim, while a monster I had just released was trying to break out of its cage floors below. Back in my cubicle, the yellow light of my lamp felt like a cruel joke. There was no safety here. The building was a prison, a hunting ground, and I was the prey. My experiment had been a catastrophic success. The rules were real. The consequences were real. And I was a fool that I collapsed into my chair, my body racked with tremors. I tried to work, but my hands wouldn't obey. My mind was a maelstrom of fear and regret. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the thing from the mirror standing there, its face my face, its smile a predatory slash in the dark. That it was then that I was approached by Mr. Gray, that I didn't hear him coming. One moment I was alone, staring at my screen, the next he was just there. Standing beside my cubicle, a cheap ceramic mug in his hand. Rule number 9. A man named Mr. Gray may approach your desk and offer you a cup of coffee. Politely decline, do not make eye contact. There is no employee named Mr. Gray. He was unnervingly normal. He looked like an accountant, a man in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair, a slightly paunchy stomach, and a bland, forgettable face. He wore a short-sleeved shirt and ill-fitting trousers. He could have been anyone. If it weren't for the rule, I wouldn't have thought twice about him. Long night? He asked, his voice soft and friendly. The mug in his hand was steaming, the rich, dark aroma of strong coffee cutting through the foul air of the office. It smelled divine. That I remembered the rule. Do not make eye contact. I kept my gaze fixed on my monitor, my heart beginning its familiar, frantic rhythm. I'm fine, thanks, I mumbled, my voice tight. You look like you could use a pick-me-up, he said, his friendly tone unwavering. He extended the mug towards me. I made a fresh pot. It's the good stuff. Trung Nguyen. I could feel his presence beside me, a placid, unassuming energy that was somehow more terrifying than the overt monstrousness I had already encountered. This was subtle. Insidious. No, thank you. I'm not thirsty, I said, forcing myself to sound polite, casual. Are you sure? He pressed, his voice still light, but with an underlying current of something else. Insistence. It's no trouble at all. He wasn't leaving. I remembered the rest of the rule. Politely decline and walk away. I had to move. That I pushed my chair back and stood up, still keeping my eyes averted from his face. I need to use the restroom, I lied, my voice trembling slightly. I started to walk away, down the aisle towards the other side of the office. That I didn't look back, but I could feel him watching me. I expected him to stay there, but then I heard it. The soft, shuffling sound of his shoes on the floor behind me. He was following me. My blood ran cold. I walked faster, my casual stroll turning into a power walk. I could still hear him behind me, keeping pace, the soft shuffle of his shoes a terrifying counterpoint to my own panicked footsteps. I didn't dare run. I didn't want to show him how scared I was. I navigated the maze of cubicles, taking random turns, hoping to lose him. But he was always there, a few paces behind me, a silent, persistent shadow. I finally circled back towards my own desk, my lungs burning, my mind screaming. He was still there. As I rounded the final corner, I risked a quick, sideways glance. And I saw his face. He was still holding the mug of coffee. And he was smiling. It was the widest, most unnatural smile I had ever seen. It stretched his bland, forgettable face into a grotesque parody of friendliness. His mouth was open too wide, showing too many teeth, and his eyes, which I had so carefully avoided, were 2 points of flat, black, emotionless glass. It was the smile of a mannequin, a predator wearing a human suit that I whipped my head back around, my heart seizing in my chest. I practically dove into my cubicle, collapsing into my chair, my back to the aisle. I stared at my monitor, praying he would leave. I could hear the shuffling stop right behind me, just as the other footsteps had. He was standing there, waiting. The silence was deafening that I don't know how long he stood there. It could have been minutes, it could have been an hour. My entire world had shrunk to the glowing rectangle of my computer screen and the terrifying presence at my back. Finally, after an eternity, I heard the soft, shuffling footsteps move away. I waited, listening until they had completely faded into the distance. Only then did I dare to breathe that I was unraveling. The constant state of fear, the sleep deprivation, the sheer, unrelenting weirdness of it all was eroding my sanity. I felt like a rat in a maze designed by a mad god, with electric shocks and hidden monsters behind every corner. And then, my gaze fell upon my computer screen. And I saw that it hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. Sitting on my desktop, next to the source folder and the VPC database program, was a new file. A simple, text file icon. The title of the file made the air freeze in my lungs. Alex_logirule number 10. You may, at some point, see a file on your desktop titled with your own name, followed by _log. Do not open this file. We cannot stress this enough. It knows more about you than you do. It was here. The final, most explicitly warned against rule. My hand hovered over the mouse, my finger trembling above the button. Every instinct, every fiber of my being, every terrifying experience I had endured in this building, screamed at me not to do it, but the morbid curiosity, the desperate need to understand, was still there, a toxic bloom in the ruins of my psyche. The things I had seen, they were impossible. A reflection that moved on its own. A man who wasn't a man. A voice that knew my mother's sound. How? How was any of it possible? It knows more about you than you do. That sentence was a challenge. A hook. What could it possibly know? My address? My bank details? That was just data. But the rule implied something more. Something deeper. I was broken. My judgment was gone, drowned in a sea of terror. I had to know. I had to see what was inside. With a final, fatalistic click, I double-clicked the file. It opened instantly. No loading time. A simple, plain text document, filled with dense, black text. It was a log file, as the name suggested. Timestamps, followed by entries. My blood turned to ice as I began to read. 20 hours 55 minutes and 3 seconds, subject arrived on 9th floor. Initial emotional state, heightened anxiety, fear. Respiratory and heart rate elevated, 20 hours 57 minutes and 12 seconds, subject discovered replacement bulb. Emotional response, minor relief, immediately followed by increased paranoia. Correctly deduced surveillance, 21 hours 15 minutes and 45 seconds, subject noted olfactory stimuli, damp soil, trace hemoglobin. Logical deduction process is slow but functional, 22 hours 5 minutes and 10 seconds, auditory patrol initiated. Subject detected footsteps. Adhered to Protocol 7. Stress levels increased by 45%. Positive, 3 minutes and 1 second, lamp protocol initiated. Subject failed. Panic response overrode protocol adherence. Moved at T plus 12 seconds instead of T plus 600 seconds, 3 minutes and 15 seconds, consequence protocol 7B, pursuit, initiated. Subject's terror levels approaching peak efficiency, 4 minutes and 22 seconds, vocalization protocol 4A, maternal, initiated. Subject failed. Emotional vulnerability exploited successfully, 4 minutes and 31 seconds, consequence protocol 4B, sensory overload, initiated. Subject exhibits desired response. Neurological stress at 98%. Excellent. That I scrolled down, my hand shaking so hard the text blurred. It was a log of my entire night. My actions. My reactions. My emotional states. It knew I was scared. It knew I was paranoid. It knew I had deduced I was being watched, but then I got further down the log, to the entries from just moments ago. 1 hour 28 minutes and 15 seconds, subject is considering a breach of Protocol 6. Morbid curiosity is a powerful motivator. We approve. 1 hour 33 minutes and 45 seconds, mirror entity designated, the twin, has been engaged. Subject's reaction is optimal. Fear has been harvested successfully. 1 hour 34 minutes and 50 seconds, subject has successfully contained the twin. A new record. Previous subject lasted 12 seconds before attempting to flee. 2 hours 12 minutes and 3 seconds, entity designated, Mr. Gray, has been deployed. Subject adhered to Protocol 9. Avoided ingestion of psychoactive agent. Disappointing, but the fear response was adequate. My thoughts. It had logged my thoughts. Morbid curiosity is a powerful motivator. I had thought that. Those exact words. How? How? This wasn't just surveillance. This was mind reading. That I frantically scrolled to the bottom of the log, my eyes scanning the final lines, my mind reeling in horror. 2 hours 45 minutes and 10 seconds, subject has discovered Alex_LOG. Protocol 10 is now in effect. 2 hours 45 minutes and 15 seconds, subject is experiencing cognitive dissonance and extreme psychological distress. Realization of omniscience is a critical stage in the process. 2 hours 45 minutes and 20 seconds, subject is thinking, how? How? This isn't just surveillance. This was mind reading. Correct. A most perceptive subject. 2 hours 45 minutes and 28 seconds, subject is now reading this exact line of text, his heart rate exceeding 160 BPM. The loop is complete. Welcome to Van Fat, Alex. That I screamed and slammed the laptop shut. I shoved it away from me, sending it crashing to the floor. I scrambled back, my chair hitting the wall of the cubicle, my breath coming in ragged, hysterical sobs. That IT was reading my mind. It was logging my thoughts in real time. The file, the text, it was taunting me, playing with me. It knew what I was thinking as I was thinking it. The sheer, existential horror of that revelation was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the sanity from my mind. That I was not an employee. I was a lab rat. A specimen in some kind of horrifying, supernatural experiment. And this building, this corporation, it wasn't just watching me. It was inside my head. That my wild, terrified gaze fell upon the clock in the corner of my broken monitor on the floor. The time was 3:32 a.m., and I remembered the final, untested rule. The one about the grandfather clock in the lobby, the one whose hands were permanently, unnaturally frozen, rule number 8. The clock in the lobby stops at 3:33 a.m. Don't stare at it, something stares back. The building's low hum seemed to change pitch, to deepen into a resonant, gut-wrenching tone. A single, loud gong echoed up from the lobby below, the sound of an ancient bell being struck. The time had come. The gong, that single, deafening chime from the lobby clock, a sound that should have been impossible from a machine whose hands were frozen in time, was a declaration of war. It wasn't just a signal that the time was 3:33 a.m., it was the building announcing its main event. The low, guttural hum that was the constant soundtrack to my nightmare deepened into a vibrant, pulsating thrum that vibrated through the concrete floor, up my legs, and into the base of my skull. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The game had changed. I was no longer just a rat in a maze, the maze itself was now awake, and it was hungry. Slamming the laptop shut had been a reflex, a desperate, futile attempt to unsee what I had seen. But the knowledge was burned into my mind. The Alex_LOG. The live transcription of my own terror. It wasn't surveillance, it was a violation on a psychic level. The corporation, the entity, whatever it was, wasn't just in the building, it was in my head. My fear, my anxiety, my desperation, it wasn't just a side effect of the job, it was the product. I was the raw material, and my sanity was being processed that I stayed huddled on the floor, my back pressed against the flimsy cubicle wall, for what felt like an eternity. The rhythmic, pulsing thrum of the building was a monstrous heartbeat all around me. And with the thrum came new sounds. Whispers. Before, the whispers had been faint, almost subliminal, like the sighing of vents. Now, they were clear, distinct, and everywhere. They slithered from the dark corners between cubicles, dripped from the ceiling vents, and coiled out from under my desk. And they all spoke my name, Alex, a dry, sibilant hiss from my left, Qua, my Vietnamese name, spoken in a wet, gurgling whisper from my right, he's scared, a childish giggle from above, he knows, a deep, gravelly voice that seemed to emanate from the floor itself, show him, the building was talking about me. To me. It was a chorus of the damned, and I was their sole audience. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The voices were inside my head as much as they were outside. They were the same voices from the Alex_LOG, the unseen observers now making their presence known. This was the true face of Van Fat. The data entry was a meaningless ritual, the office a stage, and the rules were the script for a play designed to break me. Every night I came back, lured by the obscene salary that now felt like blood money. I was willingly strapping myself into a machine designed to strip mine my soul, and yet, I kept coming back. The days became a hazy, sleepless purgatory. I'd get home as the sun rose, my body trembling with exhaustion, but sleep offered no escape. My dreams were extensions of the office, filled with endless, red-lit hallways and the mocking grin of my own reflection. I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the guttural laugh from the computer speakers echoing in my silent apartment. I started hearing the whispers even at home, faint and at the edge of my hearing, my name spoken on the wind outside my window. I saw shadows move in my peripheral vision, dark shapes that vanished when I turned to face them. The line between the horrors of Van Fat and the reality of my own life was dissolving. I was becoming a ghost in my own world, haunted by a building miles away. My friends, the few I had left after my layoff, tried to reach out. They saw the change in me. The wild, haunted look in my eyes, the weight I was losing, the way I'd jump at the slightest sound. I'd try to talk to them, to explain, but the words would die in my throat. How could I tell them that my new job involved a sentient building, a coffee-offering phantom, and a mirror that contained a monster? I was drowning, and there was no one I could call for help. The only thing that felt real anymore was the money. On the first of the month, a deposit of $1,500 appeared in my bank account. The notification on my phone was a beacon of terrible, beautiful clarity in the fog of my paranoia. It was real. It was my reward for surviving. It paid my rent, cleared my debts, and bought me the most expensive food and coffee I could find, as if I could somehow replace the pieces of my sanity that were being chipped away with material comforts. The money was the anchor that kept me tethered to this nightmare, the sweet poison I willingly drank every night. My return to the office after the 3:33 a.m. incident was different. My fear was still there, a constant, cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with a layer of grim, defiant resolve. If this place was going to kill me, I wanted to know why. I was no longer content to just be the victim. I needed answers. The building itself seemed to sense the change in me. It grew bolder. The walls of the elevator now seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, a slow, rhythmic, organic motion, as if I were traveling through the gullet of some great beast. The whispers were a constant companion, a taunting, mocking chorus that followed me down the hall's point one night. My morbid curiosity and a desperate need for a different kind of terror drove me to a new level of foolishness. I got in the elevator, but instead of pressing the button for my floor, my finger hovered over the panel. Rule number 5. The main elevator is programmed to never stop at the 7th floor. If, for any reason, the doors open onto the 7th floor and you see a hallway bathed in red light, do not exit. Press the door close button repeatedly until the doors shut. The rule implied it could happen by accident. What if it wasn't an accident? What if I tried to go there? I pressed the button for the 6th floor, then the 8th, hoping to somehow confuse the machine. On the ride up, as the elevator passed the 7th floor, I frantically pressed the 7 button, which was unlit and flush with the panel, as if it were a dummy. Nothing happened. The elevator continued its smooth ascent to the 8th floor. Defeated, I rode it back down. But this time, as the elevator descended, it shuddered to a halt. The floor indicator, which had been tracking its progress, went dark. A low, grinding sound echoed from above, and then, with a soft, ominous ding, the doors slid open that I wasn't on a numbered floor. I was in front of a hallway, just as the rule described. But the words on the page did nothing to prepare me for the reality. The hallway was bathed in a deep, visceral red light, a light that didn't seem to come from any discernible source but emanated from the very walls and air. It wasn't the red of a warning light, it was the wet, biological red of muscle tissue and blood. The air that washed over me was hot, humid, and thick with the coppery stench of a slaughterhouse, and the hands. Oh God, the hands! They reached out from the oppressive darkness that lined the edges of the red-lit corridor. Dozens of them. Pale, skeletal hands, their fingers unnaturally long and thin, like spider legs. They writhed and grasped at the empty air in the elevator doorway, clawing at the space where I stood, their movements jerky and desperate. They weren't attached to any visible bodies, they seemed to sprout from the darkness itself, a writhing forest of despair. Faint, agonized moans echoed from the depths of the hall, the sound of eternal suffering. My mind shattered. This wasn't a test. This was a glimpse into hell itself. This was the building's core, its rotten, bleeding heart that I didn't even think. My body reacted on pure, animal instinct. I scrambled back, away from the reaching fingers, and slammed my hand against the door close button, just as the rule commanded. I hammered it again and again, my breath catching in hysterical sobs. The hands surged forward, their fingertips inches from the threshold. One of them, quicker than the rest, shot out and brushed against the closing edge of the brass door. A horrifying, high-pitched screech of scraping bone against metal echoed through the elevator car as the doors slid shut, sealing me back inside my metal coffin. The elevator hung there for a moment in the darkness and silence, and then, with a soft chime, the lights came back on, and it resumed its descent as if nothing had happened. I collapsed into a corner, trembling uncontrollably. The image of those pale, grasping hands burned onto the inside of my eyelids. That was the turning point. I had to get out. Not just for a night, but for good. But I couldn't just leave. I needed proof. I needed to know what this place was. If I was going to escape, I had to take something with me, some piece of evidence that could explain the madness, if only to myself. My search for answers began in the one place I thought they might be, Mr. Nam's office. The gaunt, skeletal manager was the only human face of this nightmare. He was the gatekeeper. His office had to hold some secrets that I waited for a night when the building's activity seemed distracted. The whispers were louder than ever, the thrumming more intense. It felt like the entity was focused on something else, some internal process I couldn't comprehend. It was a huge risk, but I had to take it. Leaving my post on the 9th floor, I took the stairs down to the ground floor, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and determination. The lobby was as silent and cold as ever, the grandfather clock a menacing, frozen sentinel. Mr. Nam's office door was locked, as I expected. But I had come prepared. In my desperation, I had spent the day watching lockpicking videos online, a skill I never thought I'd need. Using a bent paperclip and a small metal file from a toolkit, my hands shaking, I worked on the simple lock. It felt like an eternity, every scrape of metal echoing like a gunshot in the silent lobby. Finally, with a soft click, the lock gave way and I slipped inside, closing the door behind me. The office was just as I remembered it, cold, sterile, and windowless. I didn't dare turn on the light, using my phone's dim screen to see. I went straight for the filing cabinet in the corner. It was unlocked, the drawers were filled with standard, boring employee files, all arranged alphabetically. But they were all for people I'd never seen or heard of. Then I noticed the dates. 1985, 1992. 2003, these were old. I pulled out a file at random. The name was Nguyen Van Hung. Inside was a standard contract, an ID photo, and a single, laminated sheet of paper. It was a list of rules. My rules. Almost identical, with slight variations. Rule number 9 mentioned a woman named Ms. Dow, who offered tea, not a Mr. Gray. Rule number 11 had the same warning about the security camera. Clipped to the back of the file was a small, separate sheet. On it was a single, stark word, stamped in red ink, terminated. My blood ran cold. I pulled out another file. And another. Lo Ti Lon, terminated. Pham Minh Duc, terminated. Tran Gia Bao, terminated. They all had the same list of rules, the same red stamp. And the photos, the faces of the employees were all young men, mostly in their 20s, all with the same look of haggard desperation in their eyes. A look I recognized from my own reflection. Some of them looked like me. Not identical, but they had my build, my hair color, my general facial structure. It was as if Van Fat were hiring a specific type. This wasn't a list of former employees. This was a list of victims. My hands trembling, I dug deeper, pushing past the rows of files. At the very back of the bottom drawer, my fingers brushed against something else. A thin, leather-bound journal. It had no name, no title. I opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise, but the words were those of a man losing his mind. It seemed to be the personal log of a previous manager. The entries were dated, stretching back years. At first, they were clinical, detached. October 12th, new candidate selected. Tran, AK fits the profile. Desperation quotient is high. Prognosis, 4 to 6 weeks. November 3rd, subject 901, Tran, is responding well to initial stimuli. Fear output is consistent. The feedings have been stable. Fear output. Feedings. The words made me feel sick. This confirmed it. We were cattle, and our terror was the harvest, but as I read on, the entries became more frantic, more personal. February 17th, it's growing stronger. The old rules are becoming less effective. The bleed-through from level 7 is more frequent. Had to incinerate 3 workstations on the 4th floor after the infestation. We need a new protocol. May 21st, I saw it in the glass today. Not in the break room mirror, but in the reflection of a darkened monitor. It wore my face. It smiled at me. I know it wants out. This building is not a cage. It is a womb. And it is getting ready to give birth. Then I found the entry that made my world stop. July 9th, found the old schematics. This place. Van Fat, it wasn't built to be a factory. It was built on top of something. A nexus. A wound in the world. The company isn't a company. It's a containment project. The night shift, the data entry, it's all a lie. The work, the monotonous, rhythmic clacking of keys, the low-level energy of a single, focused human mind, it's a lullaby. It's meant to keep the sleeper calm. The rules aren't to protect the employee. They are to prevent us from startling the beast. We aren't feeding it with our fear. Our fear is just a byproduct. A symptom of its waking. We are the white noise machine in a cosmic nursery, trying to stop a god monster from waking up. And I think it's starting to dream. I dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a soft thud. A containment site. A lullaby. We weren't just lab rats. We were living sacrifices, our minds used as a psychic sedative to keep something ancient and terrible asleep. And my fear, my breaking of the rules, my frantic energy. I wasn't feeding it. I was waking it up that I had to get out. I grabbed the journal, shoved it in my jacket, and fled the office, not caring anymore if they knew I had been there. I ran back up the stairs, my mind reeling with the horrifying truth. The rest of the night was a blur of pure terror. My new knowledge painted everything in a more horrifying light. Mr. Gray appeared again, his form seeming less stable this time. As I mumbled my refusal of his coffee and hurried away, I glanced back, and for a split second, his face seemed to melt, his eyes elongating into black, insect-like ovals, his smiling mouth stretching impossibly wide before snapping back into its bland, human shape. The footsteps that patrolled the office were no longer content to just shuffle. They started to chase me. I'd be walking to the restroom, and the soft shuffling would suddenly turn into a frantic, pounding run, chasing me right to the door. I'd slam it shut, my heart hammering, and listen to the heavy, inhuman breathing on the other side, and at 3:33 a.m., driven by a new, self-destructive need to see, to understand the enemy, I broke another rule. I walked down to the lobby. The gong had already sounded, the building thrumming with that terrible, deep energy. I stood before the frozen grandfather clock, rule number 8. Don't stare at it, something stares back that I stared. I stared past my own pale, terrified reflection on the glass, into the dark, polished wood behind the hands. At first, there was nothing. Then, slowly, a shape began to form in the reflection. It was my shape, my silhouette. But it was made of pure, roiling shadow. It mimicked my posture, my wide-eyed stare. And then, just like my reflection in the break room mirror, it smiled. A wide, predatory grin that was pure darkness, a void in the shape of a smile. It raised a shadowy hand and waved, its fingers long and distorted. I stumbled back with a cry, my sanity fraying at the edges. The Alex_log reappeared on my desktop, its contents more cruel, more intimate. 3 hours 33 minutes and 50 seconds, subject has engaged with the Herald. Excellent. The connection is strengthening. He is beginning to see. 3 hours 34 minutes and 10 seconds, he is thinking about the journal. He believes he understands. His understanding is a child's drawing of a nuclear explosion. Cute but inaccurate. 3 hours 34 minutes and 25 seconds, the lullaby is failing. The sleeper is stirring. It dreams of him now. It dreams of wearing his skin that I didn't shut the laptop this time. I couldn't move. I just stared at the words, at the live feed of my own psychic unraveling. The entity wasn't just in my head anymore. It was having a conversation with me that I survived until 5 a.m. I don't know how. My mind was a shattered wreck. My only thought was escape. To take the journal and run, to disappear and never look back. I stumbled to the lobby, my body a puppet running on its last, frayed strings. I reached the security station by the exit. The final rule. The last hurdle, rule number 11. Before you leave, check the live feed from the security camera. If, on the screen, you see yourself still sitting at your desk, do not go back. Run. Flee the building and do not return. I looked at the monitor. My hands were gripping the console to keep me from falling. My heart hammered in my chest. Please be empty. Please be empty. The grainy, black and white screen showed my cubicle on the 9th floor. The desk lamp cast its lonely yellow glow, and I was sitting there. I was on the screen, hunched over the keyboard, my fingers moving rhythmically, typing the endless, meaningless data. A perfect image of me, working diligently, but I was standing right here. In the lobby. Staring at the screen, the blood drained from my face. It was impossible. A doppelganger? A ghost? The entity that wore my face in the mirror, that mimicked me in the clock. Had it finally taken my place? The rule said to run. To flee and never return. My chance was now. The door was right there, but as I looked at the figure on the screen, the thing that looked exactly like me, it stopped typing. It slowly, deliberately, lifted its head. And it looked directly at the camera. Directly at me. It smiled. My smile. But it was empty. Dead. The eyes were black pits of nothingness, and then I broke the final rule. I was supposed to run. But I hesitated. I stared, frozen in a mixture of terror and disbelief, for 1 second too long. In that single, fatal second of hesitation, I heard a floorboard creak right behind me. Before I could turn, before I could scream, before I could even process the warning that my own rule-breaking had just triggered, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was not a human hand. It was ice-cold, the grip impossibly strong, each finger feeling like a steel talon digging into my flesh. The whispers swirled around me, no longer from the corners of the room, but from a single source, right behind my ear. A voice, deep and ancient, a voice that sounded like grinding stone and shifting earth, the voice of the sleeper itself, now wide awake. Going so soon, it whispered. The shift is not over. We have so much more to process. The cold. That was the first thing that registered, a cold so profound it felt like it was freezing my soul from the inside out. It radiated from the hand on my shoulder, a hand of ancient ice and graveyard stone, its grip like a vice. The voice, that impossible voice of grinding earth, was not just in my ear, it was inside my skull, a seismic event that shook the foundations of my consciousness. Going so soon. The shift is not over. We have so much more to process. Primal, mindless terror erupted in my chest, a supernova of adrenaline that blasted away the paralysis. I didn't think. I reacted. I twisted my body, a violent, convulsive spasm, and wrenched my shoulder from its grasp. I heard a sound like tearing fabric, and a searing pain shot down my arm, but I was free. I stumbled forward, crashing into the security console, and scrambled away, my eyes still locked on the monitor where the dead-eyed version of me was still smiling its vacant, horrifying smile. I didn't run for the door. The entity, the thing that had grabbed me, was between me and the exit. My only path was back inside, back into the heart of the nightmare. I fled back into the main lobby, my feet slipping on the polished marble floor. The vast, empty space no longer felt silent. It was filled with a low, wet, breathing sound, a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere at once, the sound of the sleeper, now awake. The grandfather clock, its hand still frozen at 3:33, let out another deafening gong as I passed, the vibration rattling my teeth. I ran for the main hallway, for the elevator, my only thought to put as much distance as possible between myself and the thing that had touched me. As I fled, I risked a glance over my shoulder. I saw it. Standing by the main entrance, bathed in the flickering pink and green light of the broken neon sign, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally so, a column of writhing shadow that seemed to drink the light around it. It had no discernible features, no face, no eyes, just a tall, man-shaped void. But I knew it was watching me. The hand that had grabbed me, a long, skeletal, five-fingered appendage made of the same shadow stuff, slowly retracted back into its formless body. It wasn't chasing me. Not yet. It was letting me run. It was savoring the hunt, and why desperation led me to the last person I ever wanted to see again. Mr. Nom. He had to be here. He was the manager, the gatekeeper. He had to have a way out. I didn't even know where his office was at night, or if he was even in the building. But as if summoned by my frantic thoughts, a single door at the end of a dark corridor slowly creaked open, spilling a sliver of pale light into the hall that I ran towards it, hope warring with terror. I burst into the office. It wasn't the small, windowless room where he had interviewed me. This was a larger, more opulent office, lined with dusty bookshelves and maps of old Saigon. And sitting behind a large, mahogany desk, bathed in the green glow of a vintage banker's lamp, was Mr. Nom. He looked exactly the same, gaunt, skeletal, with those dark, bruised eyes. He wasn't looking at paperwork. He was polishing a small, yellowed human skull with a silk cloth. He looked up as I entered, his expression one of mild, weary annoyance. I quit. I screamed, my voice a ragged, hysterical mess. I slammed my hands down on his desk. The journal I had stolen fell from my jacket, landing next to the skull. I quit. I'm not doing this anymore. You have to let me go. Mr. Nom calmly set the skull down. He looked at me, his gaze as cold and dead as a winter sky. He didn't look at the journal. He already knew what it was. Leaving, he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. No one leaves. I'm breaking the contract. I yelled, my voice cracking. It's insane. This place, this whole company is insane. He sighed, a long, patient sound of eternal weariness. He slowly stood up, his tall, skeletal frame unfolding from behind the desk. You signed the contract, Mr. Tran. You gave your word. A contract is a promise. An agreement. A binding ritual. He tapped a long, bony finger on the contract I had signed, which was sitting neatly on his desk, right next to a fresh sheet of paper with the name of the next potential victim. The terms are clear. You work the night shift. You follow the rules. Your employment is terminated only upon completion. Completion? You mean like all the others? I shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the journal. The ones you marked terminated. You're killing people. We are not killing anyone, Mr. Nom said, his voice dropping to a low, chillingly calm register. We are a corporation. We provide a service. We fulfill a need. He began to walk slowly around the desk towards me. This building has a presiding intelligence. An owner, if you will. It has been here for a very, very long time. It sleeps. And when it sleeps, the world is safe. But it grows hungry in its sleep. He was in front of me now, his sunken eyes boring into mine. The salary we offer, the life we give back to desperate souls like you, it is a transaction. You provide a service. Your focus, your mental energy, your life force, it's a soothing balm. A lullaby. It keeps the sleeper calm. It feeds it just enough to keep it dreaming. But I woke it up, I whispered, the horrifying truth dawning on me. Breaking the rules, my fear. I woke it up. Mr. Nom's lips twitched into that horrifying, mirthless smile. You did. You are the most productive employee we have had in decades. Your fear is a banquet. You have not just woken it from its slumber, you have rung the dinner bell. And it is very, very hungry. He leaned in closer, his breath cold and smelling of dust and decay. So you see, you cannot leave. Leaving the building before your shift is over, before the sun rises to weaken it, would be a breach of contract. And the sleeper, it does not tolerate broken promises. His smile widened. Leaving now is how you end. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a threat from the company. It was a fundamental law of this place. The contract wasn't just a legal document, it was a supernatural tether, binding me to the entity. Leaving before 5 a.m. meant I was forfeiting my life. I was trapped at AS. This realization crashed down on me. The building itself began to scream, the deep, wet breathing sound intensified, becoming a monstrous, gurgling roar that shook the very foundations of the building. The banker's lamp on Mr. Nam's desk flickered violently and exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. The walls of the office seemed to ripple, to warp like fabric, the wood of the bookshelves groaning as if in agony. The air thickened, the smell of damp earth and rot becoming an overwhelming, suffocating stench. The time for games was over. The entity was done playing dead. I turned and fled the office, leaving Mr. Nam standing alone in the dark. As I ran, I heard his dry, rasping voice call after me, "Good luck, Mr. Tran. Try to make it to 5 a.m. It makes the paperwork much tidier." I burst out into the hallway, and the world had gone mad. The orderly, if terrifying, rules of the game had been thrown out the window. Everything was happening at once, a chaotic, multi-layered assault on my senses and my sanity. The knocking from rule number 1 was no longer confined to a single door. It was a thunderous, frantic pounding coming from every door, every wall, every cubicle. It was as if 1,000 desperate souls were trapped inside the very architecture, trying to break out. The lights throughout the building were flickering in a chaotic, maddening strobe, plunging me into alternating seconds of blinding light and suffocating darkness. In the flashes of light, I could see the walls themselves were pulsing, a sickly, organic rhythm, like the inside of a giant, diseased heart. The elevator doors down the hall slid open with a screech of tortured metal, revealing not the familiar interior, but the blood-red, biological hellscape of the 7th floor. The skeletal hands writhed and clawed at the air, and a chorus of agonized wails washed over me. The doors stayed open, a permanent, gaping wound in the hallway. Every reflective surface I passed, a darkened computer monitor, a puddle of stagnant water on the floor, a shard of glass from a broken picture frame, showed my own reflection, but it was no longer just smiling. It was laughing, a silent, manic, hysterical laugh, its eyes wide with madness, its face contorted in a mask of pure glee. It was reveling in my terror. And then there was Mr. Gray. He was everywhere. I'd run down one corridor and he'd be standing at the end, holding out that damned cup of coffee, his face a bland mask of friendliness. I'd turn and run the other way, and he'd be there too, stepping out from behind a filing cabinet. His human facade was crumbling completely. His eyes were now two bleeding, bloodshot orbs, his smile stretched so wide the corners of his mouth were splitting, revealing a glimpse of black, needle-like teeth beneath. As I ran, the computer monitors on the desks I passed flickered to life, one by one. They didn't show the static or the invoices. They all displayed the same, single file. Alex_log. And on each screen, the same, final, horrifying entry was displayed, stark and clear, classified, subject profile, Tran ANHKHOA, Alex. Status, pending. Scheduled termination, 5 a.m., June 9, 2025. Cause, psychic exhaustion, soul delamination, corporeal absorption. My death sentence. Written out, clinical, and displayed on 100 screens around me. The date, it was today. This morning. In less than an hour I finally understood the full, horrifying truth. The high salary wasn't just to lure people in. It was a measure of their desperation, a way to quantify the life force they were willing to trade. The rules weren't to protect me, they were the cage bars, designed to keep the beast calm, to regulate its feedings. But I had rattled the cage, broken the bars, and now the beast was free. And it knew my name, Alex. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a wet, gurgling roar that came from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. It was the sound of a predator calling to its marked prey. The deep, wet breathing was all around me, a constant, suffocating presence. I was inside its lungs, and my only hope, my only insane sliver of a chance, was to survive until 5 a.m. The contract. The rules. Mr. Nom's final words. The sun. Something about the sunrise was important. It was my only finish line. The final hour of my shift became a desperate, frantic struggle for survival. My knowledge of the rules, once a source of terror, was now my only weapon. It was a frantic, real-time chase sequence through a landscape of shifting, architectural madness that I dodged the lurching, grasping hands from the ever-present vision of the 7th floor. I squeezed my eyes shut as I ran past reflective surfaces, blocking out the sight of my laughing doppelganger. The pounding on the walls grew to a deafening crescendo, and I could see the drywall cracking, bulging outwards as if things were trying to be born from within. The footsteps were no longer behind me. They were everywhere. Heavy, thudding, inhuman footsteps echoed from every direction, trying to trip me up, to herd me towards some unseen trap. I learned to listen to their rhythm, to anticipate their direction, and to swerve at the last second that I was losing my mind, but I was alive. I found a stairwell and scrambled up, away from the chaos of the main floors. The concrete stairs seemed to stretch on forever, the door to each floor opening onto a new nightmare. The 5th floor was now a blizzard of paper, with thousands of sheets pouring from the printer, each one bearing the blood-red words, "Get out." The 3rd floor break room door was gone, replaced by a solid, sweating wall of what looked like raw meat. That I made it back to the 9th floor. My floor. It was the quietest place in the building, but it was the quiet of a predator's lair. The source of the entity's focus. I hid under a desk at the far end of the office, my body curled into a tight ball, my breath held in my chest, praying it wouldn't find me. I watched the clock on a nearby monitor, the numbers ticking by with agonizing slowness. 4:50 a.m. 10 minutes left. 4:53 a.m. 7 minutes. 4:55 a.m. 5 minutes. 5 more minutes and I might be freed. It was then that I made the mistake of looking at the security monitor on the desk I was hiding under. It was tuned to the camera above my own workstation, desk 901. The screen showed a scene of pure, chaotic horror. There were 2 of me. One of me was sitting at the desk, just as I had seen in the lobby monitor. But it was no longer typing. It was being torn apart. Shadowy, tendril-like arms, sprouting from the floor and the ceiling, were ripping at it, its silent screams visible in the horrifying contortion of its face. The other me was running. It was a scene from the future, or an alternate present. It showed me, my real self, bolting from my hiding spot and making a run for the elevators. It was a perfect, grainy image of what I was about to do. As I watched, horrified, the shadowy entity, the tall, man-shaped void from the lobby, coalesced in the middle of the office on the screen. It was no longer just a silhouette. It had begun to take on a physical form. It was tall and emaciated, its skin a pale, translucent gray, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. It had no eyes, just 2 smooth, empty sockets. Its mouth was a gaping, black maw, a vertical slit that split its face from brow to chin, filled with rows of needle-like teeth. It was the stuff of primordial nightmare. On the screen, I watched as the entity turned its eyeless face towards the running version of me. It let out a silent roar, its jaw unhinging impossibly wide, and began to chase him. The sight broke my paralysis. I couldn't stay here. I had to run. I scrambled out from under the desk, and just as the vision on the monitor had predicted, I ran for the stairs, the only escape route that didn't involve the hellmouth of the elevator. the entity was no longer on a screen. It was here. I heard a sound behind me, a wet, tearing sound, and I knew it had manifested in the office. I didn't dare look back. I could feel its presence, a wave of absolute cold and psychic dread that washed over me. I could hear its wet, gurgling breathing, its heavy, loping footsteps gaining on me. I burst into the stairwell and threw myself down the concrete steps, taking them 3, 4 at a time, half falling, half running. The roar of the entity echoed in the narrow space behind me, a sound that threatened to liquefy my bones. I crashed through the door to the ground floor lobby. The finish line was so close. The glass doors of the main entrance were 100 feet away. Outside, the first, faint, gray light of dawn was beginning to break, filtering through the glass. Hope surged in my chest, but the entity was faster. As I ran across the marble floor, a writhing black tendril shot out from the hallway behind me, as fast as a striking snake. It wrapped around my ankle, and I went down hard, my face scraping against the cold, hard floor. I screamed as it began to drag me back towards the darkness, back towards its gaping, hungry maw. I scrabbled at the floor, my fingernails scraping uselessly against the polished marble. This was it. I was going to be terminated. My time was up. With my last ounce of strength, I kicked out with my free leg, aiming for a small, unassuming fire alarm on the wall. My foot connected. A deafening, electronic shriek filled the lobby, an alien sound in this place of organic, supernatural horror. The entity paused. The tendril around my ankle loosened its grip for a fraction of a second. The alarm, the foreign noise, had startled it. It was my only chance. I ripped my leg free, scrambled to my feet, and ran. I threw myself at the glass doors, my body screaming in pain, my mind a shattered wreck. I fumbled with the lock, my hands slick with blood and sweat. Behind me, the entity let out a final, furious, earth-shattering roar. The lock clicked open. I pushed the door open and stumbled out into the pre-dawn air, into the world of the living. The sun was rising. Its first, weak rays hit my face, and it felt like the grace of God. Behind me, the roaring stopped. I glanced back. The entity was standing in the doorway, a tall, dark shape of pure nightmare, but it could not step into the light. It recoiled as if burned, its form dissolving at the edges where the sunlight touched it. It raised a single, shadowy hand, its long fingers pointing at me, a silent promise, a curse. And then it retreated back into the darkness of the van-fat building. I didn't stop running. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran until the monstrous gray building was just a speck in the distance. I ran until the sun was high in the sky, a warm, benevolent God watching over me. Do I escape? Or does it catch me? In the end, does it really matter? I am out, but I am not free. I have the journal. I have the memories. I have the scars, both seen and unseen. The contract is broken, but the connection remains. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I can still hear a faint, wet breathing at the edge of my hearing. Sometimes, I catch a glimpse of a tall, shadowy figure in a reflection, its grin wide and predatory. The entity is still there, in its concrete prison, waiting. It is patient. It knows that desperation is a renewable resource. It knows that there will always be another lost soul, another person willing to trade their nights, their sanity, their life, for a chance to escape the mundane horrors of the world. So if you are out there, scrolling through job listings in the dead of night, your savings dwindling and your hope wearing thin, and you see a night shift job with a salary that seems too good to be true, I beg you, check for rules, and never, ever break them.